started doing all this stuff publicly because I was involved with the Wim Hof
Yeah,
thing,
yeah,
man.
yeah. That's kind of what I thought. Yeah.
But I've been able to sort of separate myself a little bit from the pack, which is why I think they're really interested in me. I've been brought out every year to be a teach the teacher thing, instructor for the instructors in the Wim Hof method. And ultimately, what I've found is sort of my, kind of calling back to something specific. And we're in the process of creating a whole website around it. And but I'm just not done, man.
Yeah,
It's
no,
not
I thought so
complete.
because I was looking. I just sort of quickly looked around and yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, it's going to be basically inclusive of my music, of some different like instructional type series and everything. But I've been filming and I've been working on the web. You guys know how that goes, man. It's like, and I'm playing a political game with the Wim Hof people so that I don't overstep my boundaries in the sense that they would feel threatened by what I'm trying to do
Yeah,
and
yeah,
maybe, you know what I mean?
yeah.
So because I really love my teachers, man. And
That's
that's
good.
really what it's all about for me, man. I mean, to me, I didn't get into the Wim Hof thing to be a Wim Hof instructor. It all came about, but I love Wim. I love Wim, dude, and I don't want, to piss everybody off. You know
Yeah,
what I mean? So
100%.
anyway.
that's good. Yeah.
Well,
All right.
let's fucking party.
Okay, we'll jump right into it here. We'll do a quick little bio and we'll talk
Wait.
about it.
Let me hit record.
All right, we've got Brandon Powell with us. Fortunately, we met Brandon when we were in Colorado for 10 days and we did some breathing with him. He's a professional Brazilian jiu-jitsu and self-defense and functional fitness coach, and he owns and operates a dojo in Charlotte, North Carolina. And he became certified in the Wim Hof breathing method with the first group of U.S. instructors learning directly from Wim. And I think he's a teach the teacher kind of guy, too. We were just talking about some of that stuff. Welcome to Grimerica, Brandon.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man, it was great. I was thinking about it today that I'm glad we waited to have you on after we met you and had a chance to breathe with you for, like a week straight, because it sort of brings more life to the whole experience. And I mean, I've done the method a little bit on my own in the past, like the past few years. I've been playing around a little bit, but there's nothing like doing it with you on the drums and leading the way. So really, it was really great to meet you there.
Well, I appreciate that, man. I think it's one of those things where you need the direct experience to get a sense of it all, because it's pretty crazy to think like after what its effects are, the potentials of just doing heavy breathing, right?
Yeah.
So when we do the breathing in the particular way that we do it with the Wim Hof method, it is something, again, that you just have to feel. And Wim always says feeling is knowing. And so getting that direct link to it gives you this understanding that there's something there to it,
Yeah.
Especially just and you can get it immediately, right? First session, so
Well, I've been doing it. I've been doing it ever since the trip as well at home. Not every day, but I've done it quite a few times, and I love the relaxing. Like, it feels really relaxing to me once I'm like when I'm in the breath hold at the end, and then afterwards I'm just so relaxed. I really feel it in the body. Like, it's almost like a bliss in a way.
Yeah, I think it's because of we're tapping into specific aspects of the brain that control our pain relief and our, like you said, our bliss, our states of awe. We are essentially connecting into, endogenous opioids, endogenous cannabinoids. And this gives a very long lasting feel of a natural high. The sense, well, we always joke get high on your own supply.
Hmm.
And because, or everybody's holding, you know what I mean? Because we're tapping into this, it's like a chemistry that's bringing all kinds of things into it. I think you could, for a better term, maybe even call it like an endowaska, where we're tapping into, potentially even DMT, because we know that DMT is primarily produced in the lungs.
Oh,
And so, within our own system. So endogenously, again, it's produced in the lungs, potentially in some other areas as well.
yeah,
Everybody would like to link it to the pineal
yeah,
gland and so
yeah.
forth. So that, but it is for sure, I believe, present within, brief glimpses of the breath hold. You can really get a sense of the DMT, you know.
Huh.
So
So it wasn't just me then. So that's what's really happening.
yeah, absolutely, man, absolutely. I mean, I think, well, it's part of what allows us to enter into highly stressful situations with a calm, relaxed perspective.
Hmm.
So whether you're entering the cold, for instance, like,
Yep.
obviously one of the things that drew me to the Wim Hof method was Wim Hof.
Yeah.
And so when I saw him and all of these sort of, intense situations, setting world records, doing various things, I didn't fully grasp it as much until I actually met him and could watch him transition through various environments without much change at all in his demeanor, if any change at all. In
Right.
other words, he could be inside playing his guitar, singing, and then he could be out in freezing cold water, and he was exactly the same. He didn't ever even seem like he went through any kind of transition,
Wow. Yeah.
if
Yeah.
that meant,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so I realized that this was the intent and the will, and truthfully, man, I think it's that and love. It's these things all coming together inside him that propel him to be able to enter into these particular mental states that allow him, to suppress the stress in whatever given situation it is, running in the hottest desert, climbing the coldest mountain with very little clothes on, this type.
Yeah. 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 I mean, we'll talk about the process a little bit as well, and we'll talk a little bit about the scientific benefits of it, and maybe later on a little bit about the shamanism that we talked about earlier. And
And then breathe it out
did
at
want
the
to.
end.
I was thinking that can we do it live on the show as long as no, we can talk a little bit about the. I mean, it was really special the way you led the thing with the drumming and the. I want to get a better audio tape of that just to follow on my own, so I'm not just doing it by myself in my home. But I want to talk a little bit more about how you got interested. Like you obviously, like you said, you found out about Wim and you met him, and that kind of, you didn't enter into this, planning on being a trainer and a teacher of this, but that's inevitably where it led. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that process, or?
Absolutely, man. With Well, the reason specifically that I got into the Wim Hof method was because I was at a sort of a place in my life where I felt like I needed something like that. It was weird. It's kind of weird. It wasn't like I was necessarily looking for it, but when I saw, well, first I heard like whispers of Wim Hof through various channels, different people talking about him, and I heard him mentioned as like, if you really want to understand breath work and maybe cold training, which I didn't have any idea really what that was at the time. They were saying, check out this Wim Hof guy, and right about that time, the Vice documentary had come out, and so I checked him out, and I jumped into an online course that he was offering. And all of this was done because I was just going through like kind of like a major crisis in my life, man, where I felt very out of control. I was essentially, I had just started a business. I own and operate a jujitsu academy, and fitness academy and martial arts and so forth. We have all kinds of stuff that we're doing in there, but I just started that business. And right at the same time, my wife got pregnant with our first child, and all of that was all great, beautiful. And we had a few dogs, and we had a situation where one of the dogs that we were raising started to display some really bad tendencies, and he was a very powerful dog, an American bulldog. These are the type of dogs that I kept, and the situation occurred where he attacked my wife. And this happened at a time where, like I said, we had all this going on, and he bit her in the leg, and it set off a whole, it really altered the way that we were living our lives at that point in time, because she could no longer walk for about a month. She was having to have her leg heal up, and it was a traumatic situation. Luckily, my wife is tough as they come, and she handled it in a way that, just kind of blew me away. But I didn't handle it so well. Internally, man, I was going through a tremendous amount of guilt and depression and things where I felt like I had, it's a deeper story with these dogs. These dogs were huge parts of my life. They were like my children before my children, and they I've done all kinds of stuff with my dogs and raising my dogs, everything from essentially just all different types of training with the animals. So I was very close with them, and we thought that we had really good animals, and so this was like out of the blue.
Yeah, it must have felt like a betrayal.
It was, man. And then everybody looks back at me like it's kind of like my fault, which I was feeling.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So at least, even though people, assured me they didn't feel that way, it wasn't going away, man. And it was like this, I just think that I was locked into a fight or flight response system where I just always felt on edge, and I couldn't get out of that situation, and I was feeling burned out, and there was these things happening where I just couldn't, essentially I was suffering from PTSD because when this whole thing happened, I initially thought that the dog had grabbed my child, and I was in one area of the house, and I was running to the other area trying to get there. And in my mind, the whole time, I thought he had my child. So when I got there and saw that it was my wife, there was no comfort in that. But essentially, at least I knew she could handle herself a lot better. And so there was just this whole melee. And essentially, I went through this process, man, where I was having a very hard time coming out of that. And so come along, or the Wim Hof method kind of comes along in this way. And I didn't expect it really to, I wasn't expecting the impact of it so much so. But I swear, man, it was the cold water. The first time that I ever got in the cold, it really, it immediately, I mean, I had practiced the breath work a good bit, for maybe a few days prior to actually my first real cold experience. But once I really got into the cold, I felt the reset of my nervous system. I actually experienced a powerful reset where I went from this sort of, this really intense, what we call sympathetic response, the sympathetic nervous system. You have two parts of your nervous system, the sympathetic and parasympathetic. Right. And the idea is that the sympathetic is your fight and flight, and the parasympathetic is like your rest and digest, or some people call it the feed and breed, and what that more or less means is that, in these particular states, this is where we perform the best at these certain tasks, right? So for me, it was that I had been in the sympathetic state for a long time. I get into the cold, and after I found adaption, which just came from me essentially doing exactly what Wim said on the video. I hadn't even met Wim at this point. It was just controlling my breath. And I've been in a lot of stressful situations throughout my life, you know, whether we're talking about fighting or you know, various predicaments that I put myself in. I felt a lot of stress before, so I knew, you know, where I was in that moment, and I was able to just calm myself down. And when I did, I entered into that state, and the rest is really history. At that point, it was like, this is the medicine. And I knew that we could take control of our, you know, for lack of a better word, maybe. And I don't claim this as a for everyone, but at least for me, I knew at that point I could take control of my depression. I could take control of my anxiety, and I could essentially center myself, because I feel that the depression is linked to the past and the anxiety is linked to the future. And I wasn't in either one. I was just right in the center, in the moment, with the cold, breathing and feeling myself directly connected to that experience. And my body was actually just going, fuck yeah. You know what I mean? Like, you're in a good place.
Hmm.
And so I just started going back over and over and over again. I converted a deep chest freezer into a homemade ice bath. And I just kept going back to the cold and back to the cold and meditating in it. And you know, the cold only allows you so much time. So, you know, for me, it's all about like trying to cultivate that experience so I can last longer, meditate longer in that space, and then try to carry that consciously with me throughout the day.
Yeah.
How
You know,
come?
so that's how I've utilized it, why I came to it.
How come you only get so much time?
Well, because it's
Because it
freezing
warms
cold.
up, or you just get too cold?
Well, you can only
Because
last so much time.
yeah, yeah, it'll kill your ass if you try to stay in there too long.
Unless you're
You know,
Wim.
Unless
I
you're
mean,
Wim Hof.
Yeah.
yeah, but even Wim will tell you, man, there's a you know what Wim did that's so fascinating was that he didn't just submerge himself in the cold. He did it and maintained his core body temperature. So for almost 2 hours, not quite, but the Guinness book is right around there. He essentially um, did, you know, the ice bath, and didn't they tracked his temperature, and he never lost his core body temperature the whole time.
Wow.
So, you know, that's what really gets fascinating. And this gets into, in my opinion, the deeper aspects of knowing yourself, and knowing a potential that most people wouldn't even consider,
Mm-hmm.
and that we have lost along the way, um, abilities that are our birthright.
Like evolutionary
And-
It
abilities.
reminds me of the monks in the mountains, like the tales of the monks melting, melting the ice around them, or you know, controlling their
Well, they're
body
even they're
temperature,
trying
or
hard,
levitating
yeah.
stones, or whatever.
Even
it
they're
is.
trying hard, though. You know what I mean? Like, I wonder if it was like somehow, like, how hard do you think like a chameleon has to try to change colors? Or I'm trying to
don't
think of
too
another
hard, man.
example,
How
but
hard
like,
is it for how hard is it for an electric eel to utilize its electricity?
Yeah.
You know, and
yeah,
and
it
I
doesn't
think
have to
we
do a
have
bunch
that,
of breathing and stuff, right? It's just like, so it's like there was a time in evolution when it got cold and we just naturally like turned up, and when it got hot, we turned down. You know, it was just like an innate thing when we had less distractions. Is that like, or something we've evolved past? Our brain is just past that, so we need to do that to tap back into it.
well, you know, this opens up a whole lot of questions. You know, is it that our current culture uh, desires and craves comfort, and that seeking out the material, um, essentially draws us away from these type of practices, if you will, because I mean, I ultimately think that's what it is. I do believe that there are things that are right on the surface that show us, like breathing, for instance. Breathing allows us the ability. It's an autonomic process. We're going to breathe without thinking about it, but consciously we can control it. There's other things like that. I mean, like on a primal level, if you think about like something like sex, this is something that is a process that's offered to us. It's not guaranteed by any stretch, but it's a process that's offered. And then its potentials, right? Like, do you just are we just mating? We're just breeding, or are we turning it into a fine art? So I mean, I think that there are processes within us that are directly applied to our connection with nature. And so when we get pulled away from the natural world, we have less need to do those things. We seek comfort. When it gets cold, we look for the warmth. When it's warm, we look for the cold. We're always trying to find this perfect balance of temperature to be in, so that we don't think about the environment so much, so we're not really paying attention to it. And I think that is something that has made us weaker,
Well,
potentially.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, we don't have those challenges to keep us in the moment anymore. We're just
yeah,
distracted.
we're fully domesticated. I mean, there's really no way around it. If you compare us to where we were at 10,000 years ago, or even like 7,000 years ago, or before that, who knows? But at least for most of our evolutionary history, I would argue that, we were almost like more of a feral man, kind of like, it was you were in a group of probably a couple of hundred if you're lucky, and you were grinding it out most of the time. And I think that I think if you took like the average guy from like 8,000 years ago or from like 10,000 years ago and just threw him in the octagon, he would just fuck people up.
Well,
but I don't know.
There could be some truth.
Well, he probably wasn't depressed. I mean, he probably wasn't depressed because he's looking for the warmth when it's cold, and he's looking for the cold when it's warm, and he's not worried about
Yeah, I mean,
materialistic things.
I spend a lot of time working with fighters. At one point, it was much more my job. I was actually a primary fight trainer, and so I have worked. I've also accomplished and earned a second degree black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I have almost 20 years experience in Jiu-Jitsu, and I've done other arts as well. So I've always been around this kind of idea that if you want to get good at something, you're going to have to eat some shit along the way. The old Chinese saying is, you eat bitter to taste the fruit, and I really feel that what you see with some people is almost to the opposite extreme. Like, they, without the visceral experience, that they feel like they're not living. And I've seen martial arts do some really good things for some people who really needed it, and a way to channel a destructive energy, or just an energy that didn't have any direction, which I think can be destructive. And so it's sort of like, I do think that there is a group of us, or there is parts of us, all of us, even the toughest guys, that are still searching for some comfort, right? Still want a piece of the good life. And then you have the people, I mean, especially in prize fighting, where, I mean, that's ultimately the goal, right? I'm willing to take the beaten body in order to have something, and I feel like that's still mass confusion. I think that when we're, and I kind of experienced this when I was younger a lot more, because I used to spend a lot of time in the woods. As a youngster, I spent a lot of time hunting. I grew up hunting, and it was a time that was like really not about the hunt, but very much about like all of the stuff that went into the hunt, and ultimately just being there, present. And the idea of like just connecting in to an experience where if you're not on your toes, you miss everything. It really, again, it kind of centers you and makes you realize that we are not always meant to be in a sort of a prefrontal cortex thinking what, where, when, why, how, but much more a sensory type of thing where you're listening, you're looking, you're feeling changes in the wind. You know, are you downwind, for instance? Are you, you know, and having to make adjustments in the moment to keep yourself relevant to the hunt. And you know, these experiences have really shown me that you know, if you were like this daily, there would really be very little time to consider. You know, I mean, I just think it alters your perspective, and it makes it so you're not considering needing more, feeling a void. You know what I mean? Like it gives you a real purpose. And I think the tribal existence, which is why I'm fascinated with antiquity, and the utilization of the old ways in a way to propel us into a future, is that the I believe that people had much more of a purpose.
Yep.
And I think that experience of being in small groups where we really where each person was valued and necessary, was something that we are also separated from now.
Yep.
You know?
Yep. I think that's why the hero's journey resonates with everybody so much, because if you're, you know, Frodo and the world's on your shoulders, everything matters. You know, you're completely in the present, and meaning is, you know, everything is meaning, massive meaning about everything, and you're not worried about all the little trivial things.
Well, it's also I think there's a lot of like emotional output into those movies and stuff too. You know what I mean? People that aren't showing any emotion in their day-to-day life, but they can get really into a movie. Or, you know, I think the better analogy is the sports teams, the people that.
Well, I'm thinking about the archetypal like hero's journey, not in the movies, but books. The story about
you
know,
like
you know,
the fairy tale, like the retelling.
Well, Campbell was brilliant, man. That in that he had the cross cultural references to really isolate the archetypes. You know, he obviously was a Jungian, and he really understood these principles, and then how to go back and look at all the mythology and link it all together and really strip it down to its rawest form, and show the common thread that ran through it all. And yeah, I mean, you're either the hero on your journey or somebody else is on your journey, and that's not any good.
Yeah.
You know, I personally believe that every single person is important. That's something that I believe. Now, I mean, you might only be important for a small amount of time, but but I do believe that people are important, and that we shouldn't be treated in the periphery. I mean, you know, I tend to think more on a small scale and try to deal with just the people that I can impact, and the local kind of movements. But it's awesome to be able to speak on a larger scale too, and think about the potentials that we have, you know, as being able to do things together. And I think it's like being an individual is important, but you can be too much of an individual.
Yeah.
So I think there's the need to balance that out and find the value of the
The
group
team, maybe.
experience.
Yeah.
100%.
So I
There's
was
people
thinking
that
that last night. So Darren, when you
don't play.
when you were talking about the sports, did you mean like us playing on a team ourselves?
No, like
or
people that
the
get
pro
completely
sports? Like,
divested in pro sport.
Because last night I was playing hockey and I had this thought. I was like, there is a value, even though I don't follow the pro sports thing anymore. There's a value to a team, like playing with a team and getting to know those guys and playing, building your team, your teamwork, your strategy against that other team. Like I just had this real appreciation for that tribal or that team.
Yeah, absolutely,
game,
for playing the
and
sport.
I felt like that would be good for people.
And I think that's what a lot of people are like projecting in a pro sport.
Yeah,
they'd be better off going and joining a team, and they would get more out of it than trying to invest it all in a third party. But
I think most people would agree that with like the team situation, the feeling of angels descending upon your team, you know what I mean, is the ability to link up and synchronize and play almost in this way that is it's beyond language, you know what I mean? Like, you just know they're going to be there. You've either drilled it enough to know, or there's this sort of improvisation that you can just do what you got to do. It's the flow state, which is directly connected to your breath and your intention, and your skill set essentially being able to just be pushed enough to really bring it out, to bring it through. And what I think that this connects into from an archetypical sense is the group mind experience that could occur, and what I do believe, the right group could experience it at any point in time. Now, at any point in time, it's always available to us, is the group minded experience, mostly facilitated by some type of, experience. Like, for instance, and I'll just, use the breathing as a metaphor. It's the perfect one, because the breathing, you can really feel when everybody's linked up and breathing together, and when everybody brings their intent to that space, you're creating this space together. It's all with the breath, and it links people up into this, what I consider a group mind. I think, under the under the influence of certain things like ayahuasca, or other sacraments like the mushrooms, or certain psychedelics, you can also really achieve these states that unify people in non-kin, right, non-blood, in this way that is so intimate that can only be really it's very hard to talk about, but I think it's something that can definitely be experienced, where all of the boundaries are dissolved, and we realize there's no separating the minds, that the mind becomes something much more non
local,
right? Yeah, I mean, I hate to frame it in this way, but this is what I believe.
Yeah.
And so, whether somebody disagrees with me or not, it's fine. It's really hard to argue consciousness, but I do believe that you can have that direct experience, and I think it's repeatable.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so in the, in the sports team is like kind of like a metaphor for that to me at this point, man, where we're trying to achieve those states. And honestly, I think it can be done in all kinds of different ways.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. So maybe we should talk a little bit about the breathing process itself, and then also relate that to the cold And you know, maybe
we didn't
also
do any cold.
Yeah, we didn't get to do any cold, but I mean, I've tried a little bit myself, but I do have some questions about direct questions about how to handle the cold after doing that.
Sure, sure. I mean, well, the breathing process is very simple, and it's online. Wim has a bunch of, for the Wim Hof process, let's say, it's very
Yeah.
simple. It's out there. Of course, he has courses that go in more into depth and really link things together. But the basic breathing process is breathing at a specific type of intensity. Okay. We say that it's best to optimally breathe, which is in through the nose, out through the mouth. But Wim also says breathe how you can so that we can get a good deep breath. For some people, breathing in through the nose is difficult. So you want to get a full breath in and a partial breath out. So there's some residual oxygen in the lungs. And the breath pace is, it needs to be intense enough to achieve the results, but it's something that we say shouldn't be forced. You have to play with the intensity a little bit, realize that your first experience with it won't be the same as your 100th experience with it, right? And the idea is 30 breaths at this rhythm and cadence, up to a breath hold. The breath hold can be done in different ways, meaning either on the exhale or on the inhale for various results. When you do the breath hold, we're trying to hold the breath as long as we can. Again, you have to be careful. There's always caveat, meaning that there's potential for passing out in certain things. And so we always want to be careful. I mean, we didn't really see anybody passing out at our experience, right? But it's because we sit everybody down or lie everybody down. And that's how you should always practice the method, in that way. Seated or lying down. Don't do it in water. Don't do it on stairs. Don't do it driving your car, so forth. But we do it to the breath hold. And the idea is that we're looking for the gasp reflex. And that is the moment of magic. It's pushing the breath hold to the point to where you need to take a breath in. And this is important to do this in what we call a dry breath hold, meaning on the land, because you don't want to have that experience like down deep in the water where you absolutely have to take a breath in, right?
Right.
So we push it to the gasp reflex, and this is where the magic occurs. And when we take that breath in, okay, we hold the initial breath for a few seconds, like we say 15 seconds, and we call that the recovery breath. And that's one cycle. So 30 breaths, breath hold, recovery breath. And that's in essence the way that you do the Wim Hof breathing. Now, what I think makes like an experience doing it something with me or with another instructor is that we're helping you achieve the correct intensity. We're driving you towards really emphasizing the breath in the right way, making sure also that you're correct, that you're breathing properly. Because what we control in the breathing process is this exchange of pressure that's going on. Like there's this external pressure, like 15 pounds or so of pressure outside of our body. And so we take a breath in, right? We're controlling the muscles and we're exchanging the pressure from internal to external, right? So we take a breath in, allow the pressure exchange, and the same goes with the breath out. So each breath is this amazing connection to your environment and the fact that you have to have an environment, right? And so this is fascinating how it works. And, breathing to me is like, it's such a simple thing to train. It's almost too easy not to train it, but it's the lowest grabbing fruit on the physiological training totem pole. Like if you just want to sit there and concentrate on your breathing, pretty much anybody can do it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that's very impactful, like isolating the breathing system and just exercising it. Can do everything from burn calories. I mean, most people don't know, um, when you're actually losing weight, you're breathing
comes
it
from your
out.
breath. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's interesting.
and so
Like 88%
yeah,
of it
so
or something. 88% of the weight you lost comes from your breathing.
from the carbon,
Yeah.
So there
exactly.
you go. You
So
could
we're
Wim
breathing.
Hof some weight off, man.
Yeah.
There you go.
That's a little.
That's a better
tank.
idea than just thinking about losing
You can
weight.
do both. So,
Yeah, and
so is there amount of rounds that you do, like that 30 breath round? We were doing, I think, we were probably doing 3 or 4 or 5 rounds at a time. If I'm doing it at my own at home, like then I do like 3 rounds. Is one round going to be beneficial as well, or is there a minimum amount, like 2 or 3 rounds, or does,
Well, I mean, look, we have a 5-minute sort of pick me up kind of experience with the Wim Hof thing that I think really does have a great effect. Maybe not as good as doing the full, let's say,
45
30
minutes.
minutes.
30
I
to
would say
45, yeah.
really, we found that peak experience, especially within the studies. Like if you look at the Wim Hof studies, that somewhere in between 20 and 30 minutes is really where we get that peak adrenaline experience that we're looking for ultimately being able to affect our inflammation. So 25, 30 minutes is peak experience, but I have stretched it a lot longer than that.
Mm-hmm.
Especially in relation to like feeling a sickness coming on and really utilizing the technique, because with all this practice, doing it, especially when I'm healthy and feel good, the time to use it is when you're feeling run down, in the sense that maybe sickness is coming in.
Yeah.
We would say dial up the breathing at that point and dial down the cold a bit.
Yeah.
So but the cold in conjunction with the breath offers this. It's sort of like putting an amplifier on the whole experience, because the cold burns fat. The cold is probably the single best way to produce endogenous cannabinoid in the system. So for just exposing yourself to the cold, ramps up, like I was saying, these pain relieving chemicals in the body, and so that, in connection with the breath doing something that's very similar to that as well. So the breath also giving you these potentials. Ultimately with the cold, you have to have some control of the breathing. So what we're doing with the breathing is essentially by, what we call over breathing, or power breathing, maybe, we are lowering our CO2. And the CO2 controls the trigger for, or the breath response, the need to take a breath in, right? So we get CO2 build up in the blood, and then we have to breathe in to lower the CO2. So by breathing fast in the way that we do, focused on the inhale with a short exhale, we start to lower our CO2 way down into this deficit. And it essentially allows us, when we go into the breath hold, to create another deficit in O2. So our CO2 is way suppressed, and that allows us to hold our breath for an extended period of time, because we've tricked our body into not thinking it needs to breathe.
Oh, okay.
And this allows the O2 to drop down into a deficit zone that can be tracked. I mean, if you had like an O2 monitor on, you would see that your O2 is way down into this place that you would never go into because you'd be unconscious. And so we're way down, just chilling in this super low O2, super low CO2, but then the CO2 starts to build back up, and it hits that triggered response. And at that point, you're in this O2 deprivation. You have to breathe in, because if you continue to really hold your breath there, you would just pass out, so that your body would reset and you would take a breath. which is, so think about like a swimmer who's swimming really hard, right? And they do like a kick flip on the wall, and they push off the wall, and they try to extend that underwater breath hold before they come back up into their stroke again, right? And in that space of basically hyperventilating when they're swimming to going into that kick off the wall, they black out sometimes.
Wow.
I mean, it happens infrequently. It's called shallow water blackout. It can occur in various ways, but that particular thing right there, that kickflip off the wall, has killed a number of swimmers over the years. So the shallow water blackout is a real thing, and we're very careful about that. Speaking about that with the Wim Hof method, you have to be really careful. The idea is when you get into cold water, we've practiced this, this unique breath method, which it's like an internal yoga system. It's stretching your body all over the place so that when it comes back to the center point, the homeostasis, you're more resilient. So when pathogen or something comes to the system, your body is more resilient and isn't impacted in the same way. It's really interesting how the breath can be so effective in toning the way that your body reacts to like a pathogen.
Yeah.
And so the cold, essentially, when you get in the cold, it hits you with an automatic breathing response. People start pulling air in and not breathing out, essentially. So it's kind of like what we're doing in simulation in our breath hold, except we're very controlled. This hyperventilation in the cold needs to be calmed. And so that's part of what I do in my workshops, right? Is I talk people off that ledge. They feel the shock of the cold, and we get them into a very calm state. And we try to do this quickly. And one of the best ways to do this, and it's really fascinating, is just reading each other's faces. And the face response is tremendous. And like, this is a whole nother thing. We get into like the polyvagal theory and how polyvagal works in relation to what we're doing, because we're essentially toning the vagus nerve through all of our processes. So this is a whole nother aspect of the conversation. But the idea with the cold is that you have this response, and we get calm, and by getting calm, this will allow us to begin our extended connection to the experience. So you get calm, and then the fun begins, essentially, because this is where we can really use the breath as a powerful tool to generate warmth. And so, I'll wrap it up by saying this: you made a connection to like Tibetan monks, right? And so there's a practice called Tumo, which some people have tried to connect the Wim Hof method to, which it's really not. The Tumo practice has particular meditations that we do not teach in the Wim Hof method. I actually think the Wim Hof method is sort of like a little more raw, and it's like we've taken the governor off, so you can get right to the core of the stuff like fast.
Yeah.
And what the Tumo practice, spelled with a G, Gatumo, this means inner fire, right? And we actually call the Wim Hof method the inner fire practice as well. It's interesting because the term tummy, I think, is related to the term Tumo. And the inner fire is the primordial energy is known to be located in our center. So think of like
Dantian.
Yes, exactly. Very wise, Graham. That's exactly what I was going to say but you made the reference. So the Dantian point, right, is that center point, like a few inches below the navel and inward a few inches. And when you have a direct experience with that feeling, which is a powerful warmth, it's very hard to deny it. And um, it gives a real unique perspective on practices like qigong practices, yoga practices, these things that are about specifically cultivating that particular energy.
Yeah. Wow.
Did you notice any difference in your fighting ability or technique when you adopted the method?
Absolutely. Absolutely, man. I mean, specifically the breathing. The cold is just great in general for repairing the body and for work and not just the cold, but the heat as well. But the cold offers its unique power, and the heat offers its unique power. Both are great, and training in the extremes in either way will offer, like I was saying, like it's particular what they call heat shock proteins. And also, I mean, there's like a panacea between the two. Training the extremes will ultimately train the vascularity in a way that is unique to it, meaning that it trains the smooth muscle around the veins. So when you're getting better blood flow, you can imagine, like, I just noticed in my fighting, like I don't, it's hard to totally put it into words, but I just felt that I wasn't getting tired. Like I just feel my energy level at my age and everything. I felt 10 years younger, and I felt this ability to really just be able to utilize my oxygen better, which is tremendous. And also I'll say this, in other functional things like running, it just made all of those things much easier. And then again, recovery work with the cold will give you, it's just so good for your bones, for your skin.
That anti-inflammatory.
Yeah, I mean, it removes inflammation, right down to like removing chronic inflammation. But there are, and we're becoming smarter with it, there are really awesome protocols and ways to use it in relation to your training too.
Yeah.
So, like how I might give it to somebody who's not a hardcore athlete, like how we would train the ice versus somebody who is really trying to get something specific out of their body. The ice can work in different ways for different people.
Like you wouldn't want to use it after lifting weights, like after powerlifting and stuff, would you? It would be more for after cardio kind of thing, or?
Yeah, I mean, it just depends, man. Like if you're doing hypertrophy work, right, where you're trying to create muscle growth, the pro-inflammatory effects could be beneficial to the muscle growth and reparation. So it might be better to hold off on the ice just a little bit. It doesn't have to be for just a few hours to be safe. Might be the way to handle it. But if you're doing something like a conditioning style workout, where even lifting, getting in the ice, even as a part of the workout, is something that's really unique. And you don't always have to use the ice as something that is just like, let's say, trying to remove chronic inflammation. I might be getting ready to start a workout and want that adrenaline boost. So I'll get in the cold for just 2 or 3 minutes and just get myself nice and calm, and then get out and I feel like a Viking. I'm ready to attack whatever it is, you know what I mean? Like within my workout. So, there's different ways to utilize.
So is the breathing, do you do the breathing then before you do an ice bath? Like if we were on a workshop or whatever, and we were going to do ice baths together, would you do the breathing beforehand as well, and then continue breathing, in the ice, so I have that question, and then the other question is like,
do we do the ice baths together?
Not like at the same time, but we'd watch each other.
I'm out.
Come on. We'd and then when you're in the bath, like you mentioned, how when you jump in the ice and you're like, you can't even catch that breath. So the trick is to breathe slow your breathing down, I guess,
Brandon
and
helps you through
breathe
that.
out all the way out. So I've always been saying on the show when I talk about, like, remember a couple of years ago when I was doing this, and
Well, I think you're having like cold showers.
Yeah, and like, but
I can't even do
I'd
that.
always be breathing through it. So, is part of the trick to continue breathing when you're in the cold, or to hold your breath again when you're in the cold?
Well, those are all really good questions. I mean, with the, so with my workshop, for instance, the way that I do it is I try to teach you components, individual components. And towards the and this will come like with the breathing specifics. Like first we go through, we learn the physiology and anatomy that pertains to the method, and the best way to get a good breath in, and how to utilize the diaphragm as a really powerful tool. And then we go into the breathing experience. I tend to take people to depending on whether we're doing fundamentals or advanced work, I try to take people as far as I think they can go, and give them a deep experience, right? And once we come out of the breath work, we practice, or we have practiced some other tools that we can use to kind of do post ice training. So the ice experience with a lot of people, especially in the fundamentals, this might be the very first time they've ever gotten in the ice. So it's very difficult for me to like do, real in-depth ice training, which I think for the most part really is just about exposing yourself to it and becoming more and more comfortable. You can apply specific techniques in the cold, but I think that these are things that you need to learn outside of the cold first. Okay, so in a workshop, you're going to get all these components. If you're lucky, you might be able to start to get a sense of what it's like to put things together. But then the work's either up to you or to continue your training with an instructor, right? And so what I'm doing is I'm giving everybody these various components. We go into the cold. I work with people to get them adapted in the cold. I would say out of the, I've worked with well over 1,000 people, putting them into ice baths and in this particular style, in this experience. And maybe I've had one or two people that either just didn't want to participate, or in the moment, or just couldn't handle it. So for the most part, I've seen every single person make it through the experience. And once we get everybody calm, we get out, then the meditation is really in play at that point, because you're presented now with the stress of being cold. So what do you do to get warm? And what we try to do is now apply some breathing principles and minimal movement, and much more of an internal focus. Okay. But we do some things that help to create and generate, or I should say, push the heat into particular zones of the body, so that, because your body is already creating the heat, and it's without, if you don't, it's going to happen regardless, but you're trying to minimize the effect of the core heat mixing with the cold blood from the extremities. So you have cold, all your heat rushes to your core when you get into the cold. And so now once you get out, if you just kind of just say, okay, I'm done, then you're going to have this mixing of cold and warm blood. And that's going to, that can create what we call the after drop experience, especially if the ice bath has been kind of extended. If you get past that 5-minute mark, working towards 10 minutes or so, you're definitely going to experience an after drop, which is basically going to be, you're going to start shivering. If you don't know, and shivering is just your body's way of trying to be, get warm. But the organs are now experiencing this cold blood coming in. So we do these particular exercises to try and keep the cold blood from mixing with the warm blood. And as you do this, especially over, a brief period of time, just working with the system, becoming familiar with the experience, you'll start to see how easy it is to suppress something like the shivers.
Yeah.
I would never say you're trying to force that in the beginning, because it's better to actually experience the shivers and feel what your body is trying to do. And then you start to kind of Harlem shake your way through the stuff and feel how you can move the warmth from the extremities out toward, from the core out towards the extremities. And you can feel things like your palms getting hot, or the core, the soles of your feet getting hot, your legs getting hot. And it's really fascinating, man. You'll experience thermogenesis by exposing yourself to cold in a way that you've never experienced that, with your body trying to get warm, or essentially it is getting warm. And so it's that post-ice training, especially initially, that really gives you the insights into what to do more when you get back into the cold, because then you'll have a much better insight and and perspective. And the breath holding, for instance, is a process in some ways to helping you extend your stay in the cold. But it's never something that I would tell somebody to force initially.
Okay.
This is something that you really need to work into, man, and have an understanding of. Yeah. It's like going too far too fast.
Because what I noticed is breathing through the shivers is fairly easy once you notice you're getting, you can't have that breath. If you force yourself to breathe through it, it's almost an insulation to the cold right there. And then the shivers will stop and you can withstand it.
And what's really awesome about it, man, is it's subjective. Everybody is not the same. Some people are extremely resilient when it comes to the cold. They get right in and immediately they're just connected. It's like you barely have to say a word. They're smiling at you. And that initial, like, I can look at somebody's eyes and their face and I can know where they're at in that experience completely. Just completely. So as soon as I know you're there and you're good, I just let you do your thing, especially within a fundamental workshop, But there are some people who are looking at me like I have just thrown them off of a building. You know what I mean? And like they're hanging on by their fingertips, just trying to figure out if they're going to make it or not,
Yeah.
And it does expose a lot of things to yourself. We have a lot of connection to the cold, like through emotions or through fear or whatnot. But when you move through that and your system resets, like I was talking about, you shift in that parasympathetic state, you're going to feel like $1,000,000. And food is going to taste better than it's ever tasted. And, to be honest, man, it's great for your hormones. It's great for things that, that give us a better visceral experience, like sex. It's great for men who have problems. It's great for, I'm not going to say it's going to fix everything, but it really, really ramps up the appetites for those things. And and so I always just I see a commercial or something for some kind of thing, and and it's laughable to me, man, because we have the potentials to tap into aspects of ourselves and heal ourselves in ways, and and ultimately, for sure, I think we could do as much as stop our own heart if we really wanted to.
Yeah.
We've seen mad potential, right?
Yeah.
So I think, there are just so many ways to fix yourself with it, But I do think that just like anything else, man, there's a fine art to the practice. You need to take your time with it. You need to realize that it's a cultivation experience. Wim didn't get all this stuff overnight. To be honest, he started training with the cold, I think, when he was about 17, and he didn't really start setting his world records until he was in his late 30s, early 40s.
Yeah.
So, it just goes to show. There's a time, and he was a very accomplished yogi long before that.
Yeah.
And mountain climber and mountaineer. So, I mean, there was just bringing in, and I really believe this, like life is integration, right? All of our experiences coming together. He had an amazing presence of mind to recognize just this ability to tap into his breath and these extremes. But that's there for us always, all the time. Like when you feel stress, it's really no bullshit to just take 10 deep breaths and see if you're still stressed out. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, we have the potentials to really alter our perspectives just through our own concentration, and some people don't want to hear that, but and would rather take a pill. But I just think that there's some real value into refining these arts that I consider to be innately human.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you more about the 5-minute energizer. So is that when I was asking you about, the benefit of how many cycles? So is that 5-minute one, let's just say, a cycle of 30 and a good 2 or 3 minute breath hold, and that's like sort of a little pick me up, or?
Well, what we do is train what we call a hypertrophic, meaning oxygen deprivate, right?
Yeah.
Hypertrophic exercise along with the breath hold. So when you go into the breath hold, what we specifically teach is to do push-ups with it. Okay, so you do let's say a round of the breathing and a breath hold with that particular round, right? So just like maybe consider it like a warm-up round, though still push the breath hold, try to really extend the breath hold as long as you can. Take your recovery breath, hold that for a few seconds, let that go, then go into a second round, okay? Usually a full round with the breath hold and everything is, it could be anywhere from just a little over a minute to a couple of minutes, depending on how long you really hold your breath. And so you come into that second round, you do your breathing, and when you go to your breath hold, try to hold your breath. Initially, it's really good just for safety purposes and everything, and to tap into that parasympathetic nervous system. Do it on the exhale, okay? But you can also do this on the inhale. The idea is that you take your final breath, and you do as many push-ups as you can while holding your breath. And this does a bunch of stuff to your physiology, but you tap into an energy source that and a utilization of energy, meaning the way that your body is processing ATP. You're going to do your push-ups, and you're going to feel like you could do more push-ups than you've ever felt like you could do. It's really fascinating. So, especially on a single breath.
Till you're
black. The rapid breathing up to, and Darren, you can do these off your knees. Okay. so or look, you can do squats, you can do other things, but it's better not to just jump up after the rapid breathing because you might pass out. So the push-ups are like, if you're laying down, you can just roll over and just crank out push-ups. This is kind of like swimming underwater, right? And so holding the breath and doing this really makes you seek out that gasp reflex. You could also just hold the plank if you needed to, but if you wanted to do it that way, like if you felt like you're dealing with shoulder injury or something, you could just hold that position. But it's the stress of the external exercise along with the breath hold that forces you into that need for that big breath in. So essentially you just do the push-ups till you can either do no more push-ups or you need to take a breath. And then you take that big breath in, hold the breath, and that wraps up the 5-minute workout.
That's kind of like when you smash your thumb with a hammer. Maybe you could do that.
Yeah.
Get Maria to smash you in the shins with a broomstick.
Right. But what's really interesting, man, right? You smash your thumb with a hammer. You don't just go, you don't breathe out and go, it feels great. No, you go, and usually you curse because that's connected directly to our brain center of pain relief, right? The cursing is connected right to pain relief. So when you yell out some profanity, it's because your body literally feels pain relief doing that. And so, if you smash your hand, or let's say touch something hot, anything that causes you to recoil, the the uh the initial reaction is for your body to go into fight and flight. But if you can, relax your muscles, breathe out, it's that same, you're applying in the moment that cold training, right? I always say my test is traffic, man. I could smash my hand all day. You could punch me in the face, and it still doesn't bother me as bad as traffic. So usually I use traffic as a way to just practice my method.
Yeah, that's a good one. So I do want to talk a little bit before we run out of time, because we want to get into some shamanism and stuff too. But the some of the science behind what Wim and you guys have done, showing the benefits of this. Like there was that I remember one off the top of my head that I think it was a pathogen test where 12 people were studied. 12 people that were doing this breathing method were studied, and 12 people that weren't doing it. And so the ones, they were all injected with pathogens, I think, and the only ones that those pathogens took effect were the ones that weren't doing the breathing. Like all 12 that were doing the breathing resisted completely. So
yeah,
is there some of that and then other ones you want to talk about?
Yeah. Okay. So, I'll clean that up a little bit, but essentially if you ever want to know anything about the Wim Hof method, go to the WimHofMethod.com site, and all of the science is there. So you can read everything, in a pretty organized fashion. What essentially created, what is known as the Wim Hof method, was exactly what you were just talking about. Initially it was him by himself, taking on what's known as an endotoxin, right?
Okay.
Which is like the shell of a bacteria. It's supposed to elicit a response. In these particular studies that they were doing, they wanted to see how the endotoxin, and they studied a ton of people prior to Wim, also taking on this particular, going through these tests. And what Wim was able to demonstrate was that, as utilizing his technique, he could suppress the inflammatory bodies, substantially, in comparison to everyone else who had gone through this thing, and let's say there have been 1,000 people that had gone through it. Everybody had experienced these markered effects, like you're going to have fever and nausea and so forth, going through this, and then studying their blood, you can see these particular, the inflammatory bodies, protein, cytokines, ramping up in the blood. And Wim was able to suppress that to a very noticeable perspective. Essentially, just get what the body needed instead of the overreaction of the body, which is what occurs when we just allow our body to do its own thing. So the Wim Hof method, being that it sort of tones the reactionary aspects of the body, and by toning it, we get more of what we need and less of what we don't need. And so, what Wim did to make it actual science, to get it published, for it to become a method, was, we had a control group versus a group that didn't have the that didn't utilize the method. So it was 12 people that Wim trained for their first time. These people were not experienced practitioners of the method. They were people that were newbies. They came in and they did 4 days of training with him and 4 days on their own. Then they came back to the laboratory and were able to display a very similar, thing that Wim was able to do. I mean, they basically showed the same. What they showed was that their adrenaline ramped up immediately when they had the injections of the endotoxin. So their adrenaline was way up, and that suppressed, okay, the inflammatory bodies, and essentially cortisol levels and adrenaline came up, and the adrenaline levels of the other group, the untrained group, their adrenaline stayed down low initially. Eventually it came up a little bit, and the cortisol levels came up, but our adrenaline levels and cortisol levels came up, spiked, and then went back down, and were basically at a normal space, and the inflammation was suppressed at that point. And whereas the control group, the adrenaline came up later on its own, right? Because we're essentially creating adrenaline in the system through our method. And so their adrenaline came up a little bit, but then they had extended cortisol within the system. So our cortisol and their cortisol both came up, but ours went right down. Theirs stayed up within the system, and they, of course, experienced the whole gambit of effects from the endotoxin.
Huh.
So that became published science at that point. It went into Nature magazine. It's been put into school textbooks in certain places. That we have the ability to influence our autonomic nervous system.
Wow.
Yep.
Obviously.
Yeah, there'll be a link to all that stuff in the show notes as well. There's a whole page on the scientific research, so that's great.
What are you guys after now?
Man.
Are you guys working on are you guys chasing down any new science right now?
Oh man, always. Wim's big thing is no speculation, right? So he's not going to put out there too much. I will say, and I was fortunate enough to get to be in this event with him, or take part in this event with him. He just received a large donation made by an organization that essentially is allowing us to go into a 2-year study in San Francisco on mental health, using specifically the Wim Hof method as the tool.
Wow.
To try and get, so it was like $1.5 million, around about $1.5 million that was given to this study, and that's being so that's going on right now.
Fantastic.
Is that like PTSD really cool, stuff, or?
PTSD is by far I would say, one of the biggest sort of things that people remark about in relation to the Wim Hof method, as far as like when people say these are the results that they got from the method. We hear so much about PTSD. I have been able to work with the Inner Fire team to teach the teachers for the last couple of years. So I was a part of the very first international instructors group that came about, and then the subsequent years I've gone back to help teach the new instructors coming through, and we've had a few years of that go on now. And every year, man, I meet some amazing people, all kinds of people that have become Wim Hof instructors. I mean, mind-blowing, like who's come out to these events. And one thing that we see a lot of are guys who have experienced different types of trauma. A lot of times, you get these kind of these alpha kind of people, just real gung-ho people who are really all in. But last year, for instance, we had a couple of combat vets that had seen some real hardcore action. I've seen that in my workshops, just people who have come to attend, more than I can remark on, man. Combat vets specifically. These are people who are willing to do the work, but have gone through some shit. And so I have dealt with that. But in this last group, we had 2 Navy SEALs, and probably like 4 or 5 guys that were, combat Marines. And so it's interesting because we see that, and this last year was more so. It was 2 Navy SEALs that actually served together and came to the thing independently of each other, but were both went through their training together. It was really fascinating, man. 2 guys that showed up and were had been longtime friends in the SEALs, but did this independently of each other. Wim has also worked a good bit with like the Navy SEALs and other special operation units. People dealing with this high forms of stress, basically involuntary stress, where your body takes over and creates a particular breathing pattern that you're no longer in control of.
Yeah.
So, I might have lost track of where we were going with that, but I have seen, some really interesting people come through, and in that way, yes, we were talking about the PTSD, has been something that people have, have spoken about quite a bit. And again, with me, I mean, that was something that I saw an immediate. When I went through it, I really became an ultimate believer,
right?
And the thing is, just a little bit more my story. When I was young, I was 5. I was in the hospital room with my father when he went into a stroke and passed away. I've made my peace with things through life, but it was definitely something that set the pace for my young life. My mom had 2 boys to now raise on her own for a period of time, and it just was, it was a life change, and it was a complication with a surgery that caused a blood clot that went to his heart. And he lost, he basically went into a massive like cardiac attack and went into a stroke. And so, PTSD for sure is a real thing, man. And I've dealt with a lot of trauma through my life, and I know it's this real thing where we get like locked into these loops. And again, I think it's so connected with our nervous system that when we can break those loops and those cycles, we get this sort of perspective. Even if you get pulled back in, because that can for sure happen, you get this glimpse of, man, I don't have to be here. And if you just keep doing the work, it can really release it. And I think that's what a lot of these people who, like I said, are willing to do the work, go through and find like, man, I can really affect my own depression, my own anxiety, and that is so connected to the PTSD.
Yeah, there's some other things like psilocybin and stuff we were talking about a little bit that are coming around
MDMA.
for that as well, for the PTSD. Like a lot of good.
When are you gonna climb Everest in your shorts?
Man, I don't know if you've seen all these. The Everest thing has become like this mainstream attraction where people are dying waiting in line to summit. Seriously,
Really?
Yeah.
So yeah, man, you should check it out. And
They just cleaned up the mountain, and it was something like 20,000 fucking pounds of trash they collected and like 4 dead bodies.
No way.
Yeah,
Oh my God.
it's terrible, man. It's terrible. And I have definitely climbed some big hills. I've done a few with Wim. We have one coming up this year, where we're going to be out in Washington State climbing a volcano again. And I've been up high. I've been up, over 14,000 feet. And, when you get into those spaces, you're pushed into a place where your breath is just like you're linked in, you and your breath, and it becomes so important. Like each step, each breath is just really concentrated on. And so, you can understand, like, and Wim he's a beast on those hills, man. It's even his kids, they're just something about those Hoffs. They can climb a mountain, and they, but it's there's like a joy to it too, which is really fascinating. And this really gets into what I think is like the core, in principle, to the Wim Hof method, or to shamanism, to just about anything. And I think Darren and I actually had a conversation about this when we were, I don't know if you remember, when we were up in Colorado. And I really think that the essence to it is love, and that's a tricky word to use, because it's more about this open-heartedness and this feeling of connection through the heart to the things that you're doing. I do believe will and intention are extremely important. I'm not so much intent or will over love, but I think it's the linking of the two together that cause this ability to drive into these things with a fearlessness. And that is what I think drives somebody to summit an Everest, or whatever. I mean, if it's just an athletic adventure, I think you're missing a huge part of it. I think the spiritual essence of it is so necessary. And so, yeah, I'm looking for my thing. I don't know that my thing is definitely is climbing the mountains to prove this method, but I do, and I am at work with certain things. One thing that I am fascinated with is the plant teachers, and the ability to create a powerful space, utilizing those things, but integrating that with the breath work,
And
the concentration.
cold and hot, maybe, or
I don't think those things are necessary in the moment. Maybe post experience, let's all jump in the hot tub.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I
was thinking more like
no,
a Nordic spa environment where there's the thermal cycles, and you go hot and cold on a little bit of psilocybin or something, and really extend.
Well, man, I think yes, that could be a great thing. I wouldn't never say no, but I would say that I believe that the plant teachers also allow us this ability to create a refined work, around. I don't think, I think that, ceremony and ritual and these things that have, been more or less, I don't know if it evolved or uncovered. I don't know what the right way to frame it is, but these things that have definitely appeared cross-culturally, having reverence for the medicines, treating them with respect, because I do think there are potentials for danger there too. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think in the current psychedelic world, we hear all of this, and because it's probably because there's been so much bad talk about it over the years, but all we hear is all the good things that it's going to do for people. But I do think there are real trappings and danger within this type of spiritual work. And so I think that without humility, without reverence, without some type of code, that I think that you can lose sight of what it is that you're actually trying to accomplish. And, I think there's a call to arms with these experiences that brings certain energies, right up to the surface. And, I've seen people go in various ways. And I think that comes down to not really developing the art actually, of shamanism, and shamanism is a weird term too, because it's, it can mean a lot of things to different people. But really what I'm saying is that ultimately, being a person who works with these particular spaces, I do think that there is a way to create repeatable sort of delivered experience to either a group, of people, or to an individual through the right approaches. And it's far. I would never try to um, imply that I know the right ways to do this in for somebody else. But I will say that I do believe that each person can sort of come to these conclusions in a way that we would find are very unique and quintessential to them. In other words, we would find that we're doing the same shit
Hmm.
if we were really focused on it, because I think there are only certain ways to get these experiences truly off the ground. One of the big things, and you guys experienced it a little bit with me there, is singing. I think singing is a great way to connect in, but I think on the level that I'm talking about, of being in an experience where you're you know you're locked in, man. You're going from A to B, and there's no stopping the train. You know, I think it's sort of like the the sailors who had to commit to the song as they're rowing across the ocean, because it really helps to get you there, tethers you to the experience, and at the right dose, and um like really bringing the experience through. The singing, I believe, is so crucial to guiding. And what I think you will find in those experiences is a synchronicity that only can be experienced. And so I think that this is like the essence and the core of shamanism. I think you can really achieve some stuff without plant medicines.
Mm-hmm.
I just think that the plant medicines facilitate an experience where you can at least, like the great bard Terence McKenna said, you can know you took some shit.
Yeah, yeah.
If I woke up tripping, I would think there would be a big problem.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's way better to know that you're working with something. And in regard, just like food or anything else, there's something that you can gain from it. And I believe that these experiences, when treated properly, are the most transformative things that we as human beings can potentially go through,
Hmm.
I might
And
add a bit of
so
placebo too, right? Just knowing you took
I'm
some
sorry,
shit.
I missed it.
Well, it
What'd you
could add
say?
a bit of placebo.
Well, but what is the placebo, man?
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Well, just taking a bit of mushrooms, and then you're like, well, now you've opened up that some walls are going to come down. So,
Yeah. And some people are not ready for that. And but I will say, as far as the placebo is essentially mind manifesting. And it is, to me, the placebo is like really powerful, because if it works, it works, and that means our minds did it. And so I think that there are ways, to, like, I'm a big believer that integration is extremely important. So if you get an insight from maybe some type of profound experience, I think it's really important to integrate it, because if you don't use it, then it doesn't mean anything. And I think that ultimate bliss is being able to do the things that we think and really do them, especially if it's in this positive way that's bringing you something. And I think that it's important in this regard to be kind of selfish, and in order to focus on yourself. But I think that the integration is so important, man. Like, I think you have to learn from these things, and some people maybe have one experience and that's all they ever need in life, but for me, it's like I said, it's this fine art. It's like, I need it more than once. I need the thing that is a reminder, and that's where all art, what all art is to me. It's like, if I never thought I was going to get better at something, I don't know that I would commit myself to doing it. So, with jujitsu, I only ever saw that I was going to one day be a black belt. That was all I ever saw. And that's why I became that. And, I think it's like this with any of these types of things. It's like you want to get better, at least I do. And I think that's what is leading me. It's what keeps me humble too. And realizing, like, I don't know much, but what I'm trying to know, I think, is a deeper aspect of myself in regards to all of this stuff,
Yeah. Yeah.
There you have it.
Yeah.
Well
awesome.
said.
Yeah.
Well said. Well, the time flew by, of course, and an hour and a half later. Fantastic. Where can our listeners track you down, Brandon? Do you have a website? I know you're on Twitter, right?
Well, man, I'm barely on Twitter right now. To be honest, like, I'm having to embrace all of the social stuff. It's a little bit difficult for me because I just, how it is.
Take it slow.
Social media.
Take it slow.
Yeah. So right now, I do have my Instagram page, which anybody can get on, and we're always putting stuff out there. I'm on Facebook and so forth. Send me friend requests. It'd be great to meet everybody through those things. I have a website that's coming out. It will be done before the end of the summer. It's going to be inclusive of my music. It'll be inclusive of some various training regimens and protocols and different things. I do traveling seminars. And so if you follow me on Facebook, we're always putting out where we're going. We're going to be, right now, I live in the South. I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina, but we're going to be traveling around the South a little bit through the summer. I'm in Charleston in the next month or so, putting on a workshop down there. And then I'll be out West a bunch. So there's the workshops are always popping up. We have them just about, every month or so. There's another workshop popping up. So if you guys are interested in that, follow me on Facebook and you'll find everything there.
Awesome, man.
And
I'll put a link for your WimHofMethod.com, your instructors page as well in there.
Yeah, that's great.
And let us know when you're going to Washington, because that's not too far from us. So
awesome, guys. I look forward to it, man. It was great to meet you guys. Was really great. The event you put on, and bringing these things together, I think is that's you have some great insight into and a vision. So I love it.
Yeah, right on, man. Well, hopefully we haven't seen the last of each other. Maybe we'll see each other in April.
Yes, sir. That will be great.
All right, Brandon. Thanks for coming on the show. Come back anytime, brother. Text me anytime. We'll let's chat here in the next couple of days and talk about what we were talking about before.
Okay, sounds good, man.
Okay,
right.
Bro.
See you, buddy.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And that was our chat with Brandon Powell.
What'd you think, buddy?
That was great.
Are you glad? So you're glad we waited till after instead of doing it before?
Yeah, totally. It was good to experience it and then ask him questions about it.
Absolutely.
That inspired. I've been doing the breathing a little bit more. It's sort of a good premeditative thing to do. Like,
you do it in your car?
A normal, I did it the first time. That's when I was driving out to Saskatchewan when I first tried it, and I was just all like, just jacked and dizzy, and I was just driving like 140.
Jacked and dizzy.
Yeah.
Graham's driving around jacked and dizzy. Watch out. Is that an impaired?
I'm just breathing, officer.
You're
I'm just
Wim Hoffed up.
He's like, you're going a little fast. I'm like, I don't think I was.
No, I'm good. I'm good, motherfucker. Right on. Well, big thanks to Brandon for coming on the show. Big thanks to you guys for listening. Big extra thanks to those of you who take the time to support the show over at grimerica.ca/support. You are our only source of revenue. And
the other thing I want to mention too is I think we have some audio that I think Adam's going to try and clean it up a little bit from the conference where Brandon was leading us through with the drumming and the.
Oh yeah, we'll put that in the black.
In and out.
We'll put that in the black budget.
Belly, chest, and head fully in. That was really good.
Another good reason to support the show. You get the black
put in
budget.
the black budget,
and
yeah.
we're going to put Brandon's stuff in the black budget there for our
I
supporters.
hope he's okay with that. He should be. Yeah.
He'd be okay. It's just a black budget. There's only like 6 people listen to that shit. We won't do the other thing we talked about in the black budget. Well, we might yet. We'll see. Anyway, support the show, guys. We couldn't do it without you. We can't do it without you. And we won't be able to keep doing it if we don't find some more. Yeah, grimerica.ca/support really does make a difference, and we can't do it without you guys. So maybe this week's the week to hit that support page, sign up for monthly, even if it's $1 a month. At least you got your foot in the door. You can always bump it up later. And do all the other stuff in the show notes, review the show, share the show, sign up for the newsletter, all that fantastic stuff. Join the chats. And have some good vibes for your weekend. All right, guys. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next week.
And thanks to everybody.
Thanks for tuning in live. We'll be back in 5 minutes. With who are we back with?
Marshall Lefferts.
We'll be back with Marshall Lefferts in 5 minutes.